They watched from behind their curtains, whispering, judging, dialing a number that would change everything. A tired single father stood beside a luxury Rolls-Royce, his hands shaking, not from guilt, but from fear. Within minutes, police sirens shattered the quiet street, neighbors confident they were about to expose a thief. But what they didn't know was that this car didn't belong to who they thought it did. And when the truth came out, silence fell heavier than the sirens ever could. Right finger before the story unfolds, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to True Kindness Tales. Your support helps us bring powerful stories like this to life. Mark Evans had learned to live quietly. At 38, life had stripped him down to the essentials: his son Leo, a modest rented home, and a heart that had grown tired but never bitter. His mornings began with hands roughened by overtime shifts, and offering smiles he didn't always feel. Since his wife's passing 4 years earlier, Mark had been both mother and father, grief tucked behind responsibility. He worked nights as a warehouse supervisor and days were a blur of exhaustion, but Leo's laughter was the fuel that kept him standing. The neighborhood they lived in was pristine: manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, polished sidewalks. It was the kind of place where people waved politely but watched closely. Mark never quite fit in. His clothes were simple, his car an aging sedan with peeling paint. He nodded to neighbors who rarely nodded back. Whispers followed him like shadows, though he pretended not to notice. That afternoon, Mark stood beside a gleaming black Rolls-Royce parked at the curb, an impossible contrast against his worn jacket and tired eyes. He unlocked it with a key that trembled slightly in his hand. What the neighbors didn't see was his hesitation, the pause before he opened the door, as if the car carried memories heavier than its polished steel. Behind closed blinds, eyes widened. Phones appeared. Murmurs spread quickly. Who does he think he is? That car costs more than his house. Someone snapped photos. Another whispered, that man doesn't belong in that car. A woman across the street frowned and said what others were already thinking: call the police. Mark leaned inside the car, adjusting something on the passenger seat. He hadn't noticed the watchers, hadn't heard the quiet accusations forming into certainty. His mind was elsewhere, on Leo's upcoming birthday, on bills, on the promise he had made long ago to protect what little they had left. When the first police siren echoed down the street, Mark froze. His heart pounded as 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing. Doors opened. Officers approached, hands resting calmly but firmly near their belts. The neighbors stepped outside now, confidence replacing curiosity. Justice, they thought, had arrived. Sir, one officer said evenly, step away from the vehicle. Mark complied without protest. He raised his hands slowly, eyes wide not with guilt but confusion. Is there a problem, officer? He asked quietly. The question hung in the air, because the problem wasn't what anyone thought. The officers questioned Mark as neighbors gathered closer, arms crossed, faces tight with satisfaction. Someone muttered, I knew it. Another whispered about theft rings and fake keys. Mark listened in silence, answering calmly, offering his ID, never raising his voice. His composure unsettled the officers more than panic ever could. Sir, the officer said, can you explain why you're accessing this vehicle? Mark took a breath. His gaze drifted briefly to the polished hood reflecting the sky. Because it's mine, he said. Simply. Laughter broke out behind him. Disbelief rippled through the crowd. A woman scoffed loudly. That's rich, she said. The officer raised a hand, silencing the neighbors. We'll need proof, he said firmly. Mark nodded. He reached into his pocket and handed over registration documents, insurance papers, and a small, worn leather folder. The officer scanned the documents, brows furrowing. The VIN matched. The name matched. Everything matched. The air shifted. The officer looked up slowly. This vehicle is registered to you, Mr. Evans. A hush fell over the crowd. Mark swallowed hard. It was my wife's, he said quietly. She built a company from nothing. That car, it was her dream. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to drive it. It stayed in storage for years. No one spoke. I took it out today because my son asked about his mother, Mark continued, voice trembling. He wanted to see something she loved. I promised him I'd bring it home. The neighbors avoided his eyes now. The woman who made the call clutched her phone tightly, color draining from her face. The officer cleared his throat. You're free to go, sir. We apologize for the inconvenience. Mark nodded, but the damage was already done. Before he could leave, another patrol car arrived. A senior officer stepped out, recognition flashing across his face. Mark Evans? He asked. Mark looked up, surprised. Yes. The officer smiled gently. Your wife helped my sister when her business was failing. She never asked for credit. She saved us. Tears filled Mark's eyes. The senior officer turned toward the neighbors. You called the police because of assumptions, he said calmly. Let this be a reminder. Wealth doesn't look the same on everyone, and dignity doesn't need approval. Shame settled over the street like fog. Mark drove the Rolls-Royce slowly into his driveway, hands steady now, heart heavy but proud. Leo ran out of the house, eyes wide with wonder. Dad, it's beautiful, he whispered. Mark knelt beside him. It belonged to your mom, he said softly. And one day, it'll belong to you, not because it's expensive, but because of what it represents. Across the street, neighbors watched from a distance, not with suspicion, but regret. Over the next few days, apologies came quietly. Some were sincere, others were awkward. Mark accepted them with grace, not because he needed to, but because bitterness wasn't something he wanted his son to inherit. The woman who made the call brought over a cake for Leo's birthday. She couldn't meet Mark's eyes when she apologized. He thanked her anyway. Weeks later, Mark organized a neighborhood gathering, not to shame anyone, but to remind them of something they had forgotten. People listened as he spoke about loss, assumptions, and kindness. Many cried. Some left early, unable to face themselves. The Rolls-Royce became a symbol, not of wealth, but of humility. Mark didn't drive it often. But when he did so with his head held high, not because he had something to prove, but because he had nothing to hide. And the neighbors, they never judged so quickly again. Right finger if this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to True Kindness Tales. Your support allows us to continue sharing stories that remind us all of compassion, humility, and the power of truth. Thank you for watching.